policemen, sons of proletarian Southerners, beaten up by arrogant daddy boys.
Misery, complaints, self-pity, and justice. Misery, complaints, self-pity, and justice. Misery, complaints, self-pity,
injustice. Chips on my shoulder. Chips on my shoulder. Radio tipping point. I, Cannibal. Hunger. Consumption. Digestion. Thanks for joining. I'm very blessed today to have a co-conspirator, but I will let the cloak off a little bit later on. And I'm hoping that perhaps some of you might feel empowered to be part of this discussion. So I am opening up our telephone lines right now. One for Vienna, 319-099-33. I repeat, one for Vienna, 319-099-33. But first, let me start on my personal journey in coming to the subject. For those of you who have been following this program, you know of my fixation tied to the consumption-production conundrum, that we either play one of these roles, either we're being a consumer or being a producer. And very often, some of us will think that we're the only ones with these ideas, but that could not be farther from the truth. I know that, and so I wanted to prove my point that somebody else has been thinking about it. So I performed a pretty simple search and threw in some keywords just to get a general idea of what kind of thought process is actually taking place in cyberspace tied to the subject, and stumbled across a truly fascinating individual by the name of Pier Paolo Pasolini, who I consider to have been a Renaissance man. Was involved in films. He was a poet. He was a book author. He was a communist. He was homosexual. He was charged 33 times for indecency. And of course, when we are in a situation that is very stagnant, very suppressing, very demoralizing, that it's that stagnation, it's that demoralization that we use as a trigger to actually be even more provocative. And I think Pasolini falls into that category quite well. I found a number of his films already on YouTube, so please feel free to take part in that journey in looking at what Pasolini did. But one of the comments that he made was tied to this idea of the consumer society, and he made the claim that it is more effective, ergo worse, than fascism, which I thought was quite interesting. His point was that within the realm of fascism, you can still revolt, that some of the acquiescence that was taking place was on a certain level, whereas very possibly and most probably, just to survive, you had to negate everything that was taking place in that level, whereas our consumer society is all encompassing. And with that, there is no escape, and in fact, the the power, the pressure that we are put under to conform to this structure is very subtle, and we don't even realize to what degree we are actually conforming. And I think with that, probably about as good of an intro as I'm going to put together in introducing my esteemed guest today, Konstantin. Thank you very much for joining. Konstantin and I, maybe a little bit of a precursor here. Konstantin and I were having a conversation. I was explaining to him this concept. Not necessarily looking at Konstantin as being my guinea pig and saying, does this stuff make any sense? Because I figure all of you out there are my true guinea pigs. But I think it's always good to have the possibility of discussing ideas because it allows for them to escape your head. You release them from this cage, and you can look at your ideas from a different perspective. And really, that's what the exercise was for me. And Konstantin came up with some very insightful comments. And so for me, his input was truly an inspiration. Well, I thought if we could do that there, we could do that here. So first of all, Konstantin, thank you very much for joining me today. And in preparation for this program, I know that you've put some ideas together tied to this concept: hunger, consumption, digestion. So perhaps if you'd like to give it a go, try your first one.
For sure. All right, good morning, everybody, first. I came up with some examples of that hunger, consumption, digestion concept, actually outside of ChatGPT. So this is my own brain chart.
All right.
Let's just go straight in.
Go for it.
Say, for example, hunger for nothingness or silence is like the need to get away from everything. And I feel like this concept that you came up with, it kind of goes in two directions, so a positive and a negative one. With this one, say, for example, you're depressed, that would be the negative direction. But if you just want peace and to just, kind of free your mind, I feel like this is the positive way. And the consumption part would look like you're cutting yourself off through various methods, like moving away or listening to music, that could be a way. And yeah, then the last part, the digestion part, is, you gotta get back sometime, since humans are social animals, and unless you're a Buddhist monk, you can't stay at that place that you're at forever. And then I also came up with a real life example, which is sensory deprivation. That is really, and I have personal experience with that, it's an introspective journey to just be, which is like the rawest form of existence, to just be.
I think you were talking about solitude. So the hunger is for solitude. And in my mind, hunger for solitude is the need for reflection, because we have so many things going on that we need to have the ability to take a step back and maybe take the emotions out of things sometimes. That it allows for us to say, so what actually took place here? Did I understand this properly? And we did not let our emotions, as almost like a knee-jerk reaction, take over. Did perhaps to think about, was there something redeemable? Did something of value take place here? Did I find out something about myself? I'm just talking from personal experience. Did I find something about myself in this? And so the actual consumption would be the reflection, really getting into it. You mentioned the idea of sensory deprivation, where I think that we need that because we have difficulty in falling into solitude. So it's a crutch that we have, and I would lie if I said that I am not afflicted by that same problem. We all are. It's all part of our society today. And the digestion for me would be relishing in that reflection meal, if that makes sense. The idea to reflect and to be whole. And one last comment from my side. I'll give you back the stage. You mentioned Buddhism. I think that there we are not talking about solitude. That is obviously part of it, but it's the ability to just be. So I guess within this model that we're working on, it would be the hunger to be yourself and to relish in that being. One of the big focuses we have is on breathing within mindfulness, that we focus in our breath, because there are so many things that are taking place within our bodies that we, due to our day-to-day activities, we are no longer aware of any of that. And the beauty of just relishing in your own breath might sound funny, but I would say if you're doubtful, and I'm referring to the audience, Constantine, I know you're already aware, but give it a try. Speaking of, let me go ahead and try to prompt our listeners here. Again, our telephone number is 1 for Vienna, 319-099933. Our subject is hunger, consumption, and digestion, and I think our intention here, and please correct me wrong, Constantine, is to see where this journey will actually take us, right?
For sure, the journey is the most important part. I mean, we will never know how to get to the goal if we don't experience the journey.
The actual destination is almost something that becomes not necessarily immaterial, but it becomes second rank. So perhaps if you'd like to go through one of the other examples you came up with?
I'd still like to comment on what you said.
Yeah, of course, please.
You said to really relish in and to kind of digest on what you experience, because that is hard, because in this world that we live in, we have a lot of outer stimuli that we don't actually perceive, and a lot of the stimuli that we perceive, there's no way for us to actually transform them into something meaningful. They go into one ear and then straight out the other, and I feel like this is overwhelming sometimes. And so this is just one escape from that world, to just seek that solitude.
Why do you think that's the case?
I mean, that's a very specific example, but I went to New York, and of course I stood at Times Square, and I hated it so much because I was blasted from every direction with advertisements, with noise, with just these stimuli that I really had no way of actually digesting and making something meaningful out of it.
Yeah, I think very often the reason why we are bombarded with all this stimulus is because we're so afraid of that moment when we have none and we are not being occupied, as if this is a way for us to, I'm trying to think of the right word, how we could trick ourselves into something's actually happening. Nothing's really happening. This is all an illusion. Especially the most important things are definitely not happening in Times Square.
That's for sure.
It becomes a way to spend your time, the actual value of that experience is never really questioned because nobody really cares. And I think, and I'm just taking my impressions based upon what you said, that people are almost afraid to go deeper because they're scared of what they might find. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, what you said kind of comes under that topic of just reflecting, and I think that's hard for a lot of people to just actually accept what's going on. But you have two choices: either you accept that, and that's going to be the hard journey, or you avoid facing all of your problems in that context, and that's going to be the easy way out. And to really reflect, you got to seek solitude, because once again, if you're stimulated all the time with all these other influences, there's no way to actually take the time to really digest everything.
Why do you think it's so difficult for people?
One part is certainly the ego. I mean, this let's say spirit kind of it really dictates our lives, you know. But it also has to do with, I mean, the ego has something to do with very primitive instincts for your survival. Of course, you wanna be above everybody else, and
that would be an interesting hunger aspect to take on, wouldn't it? The hunger for attention, maybe?
Attention, for sure, yeah. If this is what you seek, and this is what fulfills you in life, I guess you gotta can create hunger for that. But I think we can all agree on that this is not the most important part.
And I would argue it's not the trigger either. The hunger for attention is actually the symptom, but it's not the cause. So what could that cause be? Why do people feel they need to shine? Why do they feel they need that attention?
A lot has to do with recognition and validation. If you haven't learned to just love yourself and actually appreciate on what you're doing for yourself and not for anybody else, this is probably one of the triggers.
And why do we need that external recognition? Why do we clamor for it? I'm going to throw an idea out.
Go ahead.
See how you catch that fish. The reason why we ask for attention is because we don't believe it ourselves. In other words, if somebody else says we're great, then that negates any fears we might have ourselves, that message that we don't even believe. What are your thoughts on that?
Can you say that again?
Sure, of course.
I gotta.
Yeah, no worries. I told you this could be heavy. The real impetus, or the trigger, is all tied to a message that we don't believe ourselves. That's why we are always looking for some sort of external recognition, because if we have enough people who say it, then that allows us to escape our own fear of something that we don't believe. Maybe if I give you an example, Donald Trump, one of the biggest narcissists we've ever had on this planet. So he obviously has hunger for attention. But where does that hunger for attention actually come from? I believe he is still dealing with his childhood.
That's what my thoughts are too, yeah.
Yeah, well, then I'll let you piggyback on that, Konstantin. No, go ahead.
If you haven't really received that love from your parents, of course, you're never going to learn how to really love yourself. And to comment on what you said before, the trigger tied to a message that we don't believe ourselves. I feel like other people telling us that we are great in this example is also important to kind of form a building ground to kind of build our personality up from, to kind of have a reference point, because of course we can always tell ourselves we're great, but if nobody else says that same thing, then it's not going to be true. So to really build that confidence, you got to have a reference point, and I think that's important. But if you don't recognize that reference point, of course, there's always going to be that endless hunger.
Yeah, no, they need to tell you and our audience about a presentation that I went to a number of years ago. It was put together by somebody who has a PhD in anthropology, big difference. And he was explaining this concept in different forms throughout the ages, and he alluded to this idea of getting a tattoo, because if you put a tattoo on your arm, you don't see that. And the reason why you put the tattoo is to get the attention of the others, so people say, oh, that's a cool tattoo. So basically it has nothing to do with you and your self-reflection. It has everything to do with the external that acts as an impetus for us to have a warm fuzzy feeling, because we don't have it inside.
I do agree with that, but there is also one point I don't disagree with, is that tattoos, they also are a method of self-expression. And if you see yourself in the mirror, it's also the same thing with clothes, for example. If you see yourself in the mirror and see how you express yourself, and that makes you confident, then that's really also a great way to really achieve that confidence in that case. But also the same thing counts for sports cars. Nobody buys a sports car for the comfort, for the PS or anything. It's just for external attention.
Maybe we could try that one, hungry for status. What do you think that one was?
That pretty much sums that up, yeah.
So what's the actual consumption there?
For status, you mean?
No, yeah. Once you have hunger for status, what is the actual consumption?
I mean, pretty much what I said. Also, it could, like I said, this concept, it goes in two directions, positive and negative. If you just buy sports cars all the time and expensive watches and girls and whatnot, that's the negative way. But if you hustle, if you strive for greater good to really achieve that status, because status isn't only tied to let's say this to the ego, but it's also tied to seeing what you've achieved in life, and also, for example, to financial freedom.
Yeah, for me, that consumption would be purchasing items that will automatically get you some attention, titles, which is, of course, we don't have that problem in Austria. Nobody is keen on titles, of course we know. The notoriety in some fashion, which I think is very important. And we keep coming back to this idea of internal and external, don't we?
That's right, yeah.
I had a really interesting example yesterday. I think some of you will be aware that we are currently in Ramadan, and I was very blessed to be with someone yesterday who holds to the rules. So he actually set a timer on his phone when he can claim that it is dusk, so he can start eating. And I felt bad because I'm drinking something non-alcohol, but just the same, it's almost like I go to you, Konstantin, and say, you want some candy? No, you can't have it. It is terrible. And and it wasn't a big thing for him, but he mentioned some things, and I think it has everything to do with our conversation today. Something I could have never planned. It was all part of that experience. That he mentioned there was some football player playing for Real Madrid. Don't ask me the name, I forgot. He's coming from Tunisia. He was number 2 to
does he play for the French national team? Is he Benzema? I think it is.
I don't know.
Maybe.
I think it's Karim is his first
Yeah,
name.
Benzema.
Oh, you know him. Okay.
Yeah.
He also practices Ramadan, fasting during Ramadan.
He's a Muslim, yeah.
And this friend of mine was telling me that he turned the fasting into a strength. And in fact, maybe you might have even heard about this, that during Ramadan, he would perform a hat trick. He would get 3 goals, and it showed the willpower of the situation, totally internal, allowed even the adversity, allowed him to create something that he couldn't under another circumstance. So it was an example of hunger actually being very powerful.
And I think this is actually a great example of how external influence can be something good. Because I feel like we always associate external influence with something bad, like, for example, what we said before about the recognition part. If you're doing that for God, this is an external influence. But in that case, it really led to something great.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for raising that, because I think it's important to realize it's internal is not always good, external is not always bad. So thank you very much for that one, Constantine. I can come up with another example of it, why external can be extremely valuable, and I think it has everything to do with the interaction that we have between human beings, and that's purely external, and I wouldn't want to have it any other way. So that's cool. What other examples do you have up your sleeve for us today?
Right, I was going to get into that.
Sure.
All right, I got hunger for completion.
Completion, wow.
And I wrote the need to fill one's emptiness or still the voice that's saying something's missing. And the consumption part would look like looking for things to fill the void through substituting or not treating the root. And the digestion is pretty much, the void is filled with something rather meaningless. And until that thing, or when that thing loses its value, the cycle starts again. And a real life example would be next best love, if you want to fill the void in your heart, but you don't find real love and just get any partner that you can get, that's the hunger for completion.
So that was the actual consumption is the substitution. Where do you think that really comes from? Again, in the example that you just gave, I believe that the hunger for completion, filling a void, is based on something much more deep-seated. What could it be?
That's quite philosophical. It for sure always comes back to the childhood. What we said before is that if you don't get what you want in childhood, there is this problem that will always keep arising. And also, if you've not had the chance to really get what you want for a very, very long time, you might want to really experience what it's like. But then you gotta learn how to really get the what you want that isn't something that has no inherent value.
Now it's my turn to play devil's advocate a little bit. It could be something very simple. Completion could be tied to autonomy and mastery. So in other words, you have this goal in your head. You might have had it as it's a very young person. Things went a certain way in life, and so you never had the opportunity to really follow up on that goal or that wish or that desire that you had. Things go on in life. We are very often confronted with this roller coaster that we do not control. It has its own dynamics. The more we get into this routine, the more the routine consumes us. And then we have this sense of loss, and very often we're not even able to clearly pinpoint what that could be. But let's go back to the point, this gap. So the hunger is to fill the gap. Then that means we need to either put the car into reverse, or we put everything on hold, change our focus, and find out whether we can actually complete it or not. I speak from personal experience. You know, you wonder very often why you do what you do, because I've done a number of funky things, and I could never really explain to you why I did it. But there was a moment that all of a sudden it clicked. And I think it's very much tied to this point that you raised here, Konstantin. And for me, it was the confirmation that I could actually do it. And I came to the conclusion that basically I was running my entire life based upon this premise that said, well, I wonder if I can, I'm going to come up with something funky, obtuse. I wonder if I can hold my breath 2-3 minutes underwater. And you never know if you could do that if you never try, right? And sometimes the goals might be a little bit bigger than that. Living somewhere else, changing directions completely in your life, deciding that you don't want to be in the scene that you find yourself to be in. And of course, all of these decisions that we're making are all strewn with risk, right? Because it might not work out. You might totally fail. And so the older you get, the more difficult that one becomes. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, this idea of hunger for completion, to complete those things that we'll never know whether we can do them if we don't try.
That would certainly be the positive direction to go in, yeah.
I had to give it a positive, right?
Yeah, it was going to get dark.
To external, right?
It was going to get dark without you, yeah.
Oh, come on. We both have our flashlights and we keep shining at each other, and that was the whole idea.
Ready for blackout.
Right, okay. Unfortunately, we can't do that here in the studio. The lights automatically go on. If I was to turn off the lights, that would mean that would be killing the show. We don't want to do that. Speaking of show, for those of you who perhaps just turned into 94.0 or perhaps streaming, you are listening to Radio Tipping Point. In our show, my name is Mike Boyle, and today our show is called Cannibal, Hunger, Consumption and Digestion. And I'm very blessed to have Konstantin with me in the studio as my sparring partner, so to speak. And Konstantin, I believe you're going to come up with another example for us, right? Yeah?
Sure.
All right.
So, a hunger for harmony. The need for everything to always be picture perfect. Of course, like I said before, two directions. The first one, let's do the positive one first. Is, of course, if you're in a difficult situation, you want things to be alright. So there's nothing wrong with that. But then again, the negative direction would be to really have that need for everything, like I said, to be picture perfect no matter what, and to not accept the fact that things aren't always going to be alright. Now the consumption part is either going blind to the situation, so this could also result in the hunger for solitude, because if you're alone, you're in harmony and nothing is bothering you, or actually doing something against it. And the digestion part is, once entropy has struck, it would take efforts for a human relationship, in that case, or that example, a human relationship, to become stable again. So, like I said, you gotta do something about it. And also a real life example would be mediation. So if two of your friends are in an argument, you might want to step in and help them sort it out.
I love how you've gone ahead and taken this idea and very consciously tried to take the concept from two, maybe not necessarily polar direction, but certainly from different directions. I think that was a very interesting idea. Thank you very much for that. Harmony, and especially, can we start with a definition of harmony?
Well, and that's a hard one.
Yeah, you want to give it a go?
Certainly a hard one. Harmony is, if I take, for example, harmony in music, it's everything fits together. I feel like
on
that
the right road.
I feel like that's the right direction.
So
yeah.
how does that work with human beings?
Human beings are always going to be different. So there's no two same human beings, and everybody has different values. And it's...
You play different instruments, they come from different directions.
That's right.
So
you gotta...
Are they really different?
You gotta tune these instruments to a certain way so that they maybe don't quite fit together, but fit together enough for them to sound alright.
And staying with that analogy, because I think it's a really good one, then when we're talking about harmony between different people, does that mean that we are actually fine-tuning maybe our thought, and I'm just thinking out loud, that our thought processes, maybe the way that we phrase things, looking at it from the music perspective, so that we work together and not against each other? Let me give you an example. We talk about growth, we talk about more, and we know that it's not tenable. We cannot go on forever wanting more. It doesn't work. And then, of course, if we were putting all of this on a scale, then we would have to, instead of overcompensating, we would have to undercompensate. Because if you were to look at this as being like a scale, if you have too much here, then you need to add something to the other side or take something from the other side so that you reach that balance. So in my mind, harmony is balance. Your thoughts?
Of course, in a perfect world, it would be balancing on a straight level, so both sides are filled with the same amount of weight in that case. But that's not always going to happen.
That's a prerequisite, right?
Balance doesn't mean that everything's all right. Something can be balancing, but also be almost falling over, So coming back to the example of human relationship. A relationship could be balanced out, but there could be just one push, and this relationship could break.
Oh wow, we're really going in an interesting direction. We have 16 minutes to go. I think that I could easily cover the 16 minutes on this one. A balance, if we look at harmony and we compare it to balance, then we know that we live in a dynamic environment, meaning that everything is always in flux. Do you feel the same way every day? The answer is no. Does that mean that you have to perhaps overcompensate some days for those inadequacies? And some days it just doesn't work. And you're not alone, obviously. This happens to all of us. Yesterday for me was a great example where I don't think it mattered which language it was. I felt that everything I was saying was gibberish. I didn't make any sense. I was trying to explain something. I couldn't see the people on the other side, but it's almost like they're scratching their head and they're saying, what the hell is this guy talking about? And so within this harmony, and that might sound minute in comparison to where you were taking the conversation, but I think it's very important. We're not always in tune every day, meaning that we should accept it from our own perspective, and we should accept it from others. So now let's go back to the example, the last one that you gave, that it could be something very small that could blow things up. Maybe the real problem that there was no acceptance to begin with. Because if there was acceptance, you would have never allowed for something minor to destroy something major.
I feel like it's dependent on both parts in that case.
Of course.
Because you said before, you don't always wake up with the same feeling every day. And
I bet you don't either.
No, me neither. There's some days, that are just way different. And I have friends, for example, that I love, but if I wake up in a bad mood, there's not much that can destroy the balance of the scale. So in that case, it's also dependent on my partner to really be accepting in that case, for my, let's say, angry mood or whatever.
I think the biggest problem that we have very often, if let's say if we are the recipient, if we turn things around and somebody is being a little bit crabby that day, and you feel that it's being taken out on you, what do you think of the idea of reminding yourself that it actually has nothing to do with you? It has everything to do with them.
It's
not easy.
I can't put the blame on the other person though, and also in that case,
are we expecting perfection from each other?
Of course not.
Well, I think we do, and it's natural
in some way, but also the acceptance that it can never be fulfilled, because this is not a perfect world.
No, and I think that to maybe tie some of the ideas that we've talked about so far, which is a very strong thread that I have in my shows, so I think that was all very interesting that we raised these subjects. It was not planned, folks. This came out naturally. That whole idea of self-acceptance as being the catalyst, and part of it is to accept that you're not perfect. Accept that sometimes you do have a bad day. Accept that maybe sometimes you really do fall flat on your face. And I think it has less to do with the others, but more to do with ourselves. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's always easy to shift the blame on everybody else and to not accept that maybe you're the problem.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even go that far. I don't disagree with you. It's always easier to shove it onto somebody else. We talk quite often in the show about confirmation bias, and the idea is if you do something bad or do something wrong, not even say do something bad, do something wrong, and they say, well, what do you expect? He was born that way. But if we have the problem, then it's always, oh, but we had a bad day.
The circumstances.
And it's you can find so many examples of how when that is taking place that we're so quick to say that the other one is suffering under the dispositional, but ours is situational. And I think that piggybacks totally into what you were saying, Konstantin.
That's right.
And I think my point here is to remind ourselves that it's always a little bit of both. That we were born this way. We are born introverted or we're born extroverted. We are born inquisitive. We are born thriving on organization. Others thrive on chaos. I know personally I'm dealing with someone right now who's a bit chaotic and it really gets on my nerves. And I have to remind myself that, yeah, not everybody's like you, Mike. I think it's going to be not easy or hard, but I think it's going to be an interesting journey coming up with a closing for the show. I don't know why, but what are your thoughts based on how this conversation is going, where we tried to take it, and where it's landed so far?
I think we've been all over the place, but I think it's been an interesting journey to really understand that concept that you came up with. To really, and I was going to comment on that, to learn something from the other person, because you said you thrive on chaos, and
no, I don't thrive on chaos. It disturbs me immensely.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, if you did, maybe you could just learn from the other person to thrive on maybe just a little bit of order.
Yeah, and obviously going back to this idea of balance, we try to keep some sort of balance that we always thriving towards order means that we're actually control freaks. And perhaps we're not looking for chaos, but we are looking for some spontaneity.
But that's one thing, that spontaneity is the result of order, actually. I read a book called Atomic Habits, where the author, he tells us about routines and how these routines actually give us the opportunity to be spontaneous. Because if you don't have these routines, there's just no time for you to be spontaneous, and that's the end of my thought.
Okay. Going back to the original intention of this idea of hunger, consumption, digestion, in preparation for the show, and preparation means kind of looking at different ideas, reflecting a lot on what my take is on the subject, and being open to see where it actually leads us to. I believe that the hunger is really the symptom, but it's based upon something much more deep-seated. You mentioned a few times the question of where the impetus is coming from, and you mentioned childhood. Could be, doesn't have to be. It could have been a bad relationship. It could have been something...
Trauma, for example.
Oh, it could be anything that we carry around because we're not able to let go. And we're all afflicted by this one. and the actual hunger is us just playing it out, and the consumption is kind of the execution that's making it happen, and the digestion can be creating this vicious cycle that leads us back. I mean, one of the most obvious examples, hunger for power. So power brings more power. So that means that you have some sort of reinforcing loop that once you achieve the power, it's not enough. Another example that you gave in one of our conversations, we were talking about experience. You alluded to it, I think, a little bit in some of your examples. They could fall within that same pattern. But the idea is to have experiences, because obviously there's the thrill, sometimes the actions might be vicarious. In other words, you're experiencing something that somebody else is doing, cathartic. And we also mentioned that after the experience has taken place, so the consumption would be being part of that experience, and the digestion is your impressions after the experience. And then either if you become, and I feel this is a common thread within society, that we are always trying to outdo what we did the last time, simply because it is an external motivator. External motivators are the ones that unfortunately always fall within that category of they work on your dopamine, and they bring you this temporary sense of satisfaction, but it's like a drug, and it sets down. And while you're going through the digestion period, the first thing you think about it, I need another fix.
This is also to do with your dopamine baseline. If you always keep your levels up, the baseline is going to rise, and to fulfill that hunger for experience, to satisfy that baseline again, you gotta at least hit it, but you're always gonna go a little above it, so the baseline's gonna rise again.
Can we take that and bring it back to what my initial impetus was, tied to this idea of the consumer society, and especially what Pasolini was talking about, whether it is more dangerous than fascism. I think it's kind of a mixed bag. We could leave that there. But I see very strong tendencies in what Pasolini was talking about, and the real problems that we have. And I know that you're familiar with the subjects. We've talked about it on various levels. So could the hunger be for growth in this economic growth? And the consumption is this consumption production conundrum, and the digestion is almost like the experience that we had with the experience being the dopamine. What are your thoughts on that?
There is an example that you also came up with that reminds me of that, is the hunger for change, which rather has a connotation of positivity in that case, because if we take the bigger picture of what's going on in the world right now, I think the hunger for change is something that we're missing a lot.
And any thoughts why?
It's easier to remain in the position that you're in. It's always hard to put work into that, and also in that case, for a new world order, a more positive one in that case, this would have to be a collective effort. And I myself, I have this personal experience that I feel powerless right now. I really do, because me as just one individual, I can't do anything unless I find the motivation and the power to get everybody else to come with me in this undertaking.
I have to contradict you here. you found the power to join me today. It would have been much easier not to have.
That's right.
So that means that you haven't given up, that you, there might be a little bit more there than we might realize at first glance. And that would be the hope that I'd like to pass on to all of you today, that following that of what Konstantin was saying, the question of empowerment is very much tied to impact, and if we maybe are able to get away from this idea that maybe hunger for acclaim, hunger for results that we may never see, but maybe the hunger we're looking for is hunger of good enough. Hunger of good enough for ourselves, accepting good enough from each other, and knowing full well that only together we are capable of achieving something that we can never do on ourselves. Konstantin, thank you very much for joining me today.
I say thank you, Mike, and stay hungry, everybody.
Yes, stay hungry, and we will be back next week. And keep the hunger for the flame.
For the good things.